This afternoon, very interesting topic. One of the reasons why it's been brought forward to today. The title, as everybody is be aware, is Communists and the Corbyn Party, or perhaps Corbyn Sultana Party. We've got two speakers. Probably don't need to introduce them to you. Tina Becker, Archie Woodrow from the Marxist Unity Caucus, and I believe Archie is going to begin.
Yeah.
Off you go.
Okay. Right, thanks very much. So I was invited onto this panel to give a bit of the sort of context of what has actually been happening, what is going on with this new party, why has it taken so long to get here. Just to give you a bit of background, personally, why I'm here pretending to know what I'm talking about. I was long before I joined rs21, I was quite involved in the Labour left when Corbyn was party leader, and involved in particularly a project called The World Transformed, which was very closely connected to Momentum's national office. So through that, I sort of built up various personal connections and so on, that basically mean I've had a lot of good avenues to get gossip about what's been happening. And then more recently, I live in Camden, not far from here, been involved in the local Palestine campaigns there. Through that, became involved in Andrew Feinstein's campaign in the general election. And then through that, I ended up being on the interim committee for the Camden People's Alliance, which is the sort of prospective proto-branch of the prospective new party in Camden. So basically, I've got various different access to different kinds of gossip about the new party. So I suppose where this mainly starts is, I think around 2 years ago, a group called Collective gets set up mainly by people from the or formerly from the Labour left, a lot of people closely connected to Corbyn personally, people like Carrie Murphy, who was chief of staff in Corbyn's office when he was Labour leader from 2017 to 2019, as well as people like Pamela Fitzpatrick, involved in Corbyn's Peace and Justice project. A lot of these people quite closely connected to the previous leadership of Unite around Len McCluskey. Collective, it also, as well as the sort of figures around Corbyn, it involved various prominent national figures as well as various local groups trying to sort of set up proto-branches and around independent candidates in different local areas. There was some involvement, very minimally, from some of the Marxist groups, I think just mediated by like personal connections of sort of who happened to be friends with Carrie Murphy or whoever else. So Fiona Lally from the Revolutionary Communist Party, I think, spoke at a few of their meetings. From what I understand, the Socialist Party were quite annoyed about this because they were only able to send a non-voting observer, and not as the Socialist Party, only as their front, the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition. So Collective, by most accounts I've heard, seemed to be quite dominated in a rather personalised and rather undemocratic way by Carrie Murphy, and was pushing very urgently for the sort of immediate launch of a new national party, and using the same kinds of tactics that a lot of these people used when they were involved in the Labour Party, of sort of briefing things to the press in order to like bounce their own comrades in. So, you'd suddenly see strange announcements in Squawk Box or in various newspapers saying, "This weekend, Jeremy Corbyn is about to announce a new national party." And then a few moments later, there'd be an update saying, "Jeremy Corbyn has clarified that he's not launching a new national party." And then a month later, you'd see, "Andrew Feinstein is going to launch a new national party this Saturday at a conference of," and then Andrew Feinstein has clarified that he's not launching a new national party. And this sort of happened quite a lot. This, as well as I think just the sort of cultural problems of the way it was being run, the undemocratic way it was being run, caused, as well as actually, a lot of these people have got various personal frictions and grudges particularly from the Corbyn years, but I think sometimes going further back. That seemed to cause a bit of a split. Particularly people like Andrew Feinstein in Camden or Jamie Driscoll up in Newcastle were very dissatisfied with the way this was being run, and started pushing for a much more sort of localized, bottom-up approach of building the party, saying, we need to start by just, focusing on these independent candidates and building local groups around those independent campaigns, and then maybe later on at some point we could possibly federate it into a national organisation of some kind. And I'm not sure to what extent this was like a firm ideological commitment to a sort of local first model, or to what extent it was sort of negative polarisation against the kind of way that the other people involved in the collective had been pushing things. Because I mean, I think we've all here got our reservations about that sort of localist model. But on the other hand, if you had a national organisation launched from the top down by the sorts of people who were running Jeremy Corbyn's office in 2017 to 2019, it's very likely that it would have been completely undemocratic and completely unpleasant to be a part of, and potentially completely useless. So I can understand why they sort of veered off in the opposite direction to try to counterbalance that. So they seem to have sort of wrestled the locus of the negotiations away from collective into in some ways even more obscure and opaque forum that basically again, we still don't know exactly, but it seems to have sort of been a WhatsApp group with various important people that we don't quite know who. Again, we know people like Jeremy Corbyn obviously is involved, Andrew Feinstein, Jamie Driscoll, Alan Gibbons up in Liverpool. James Schneider has had some involvement, although I've heard some of it is actually just been sort of, he's been brought back in to mediate when they all fall out. Also, there's been, I think, some people involved who were involved in previous left of Labour electoral projects, such as Salma Yaqub, who've been very involved in Respect, or Andrew Bergin. But I think also Andrew Murray has had some involvement, but again, it's not, certainly he has had enough involvement to like leak a lot of the details of the meetings to the Morning Star. So, and from what I understand, Zara Sultana actually was only brought into it very late on, I think only like a few months ago, basically. Before that, actually, there were, credible rumours about her being in talks with the Greens, about possibly defecting to the Green Party. And then also, again, none of this is confirmed. I think this is partly why they were all being so secretive about it. But based on individuals I know and sort of staffers and insiders plugged into things, I do strongly suspect that there are a number of Labour left MPs who are more or less plugged in. They might not be in a formal capacity, but I think are more or less plugged into these negotiations. But so I think the basic dynamic of how these negotiations have gone and the reason why it's been so slow and so dysfunctional, I expand on this some more in an article I published recently in Prometheus. But basically, everyone recognises that Corbyn is the key figurehead, the only person who's got a uniquely large personal following that's capable of bringing together enough people to make the project viable. And, the fact that 600,000 people in just a few days have signed up to this mailing list is sort of proof of that. Corbyn, therefore, has effective veto power over the whole thing. If he doesn't like it, if he pulls out, there's no viable party there. It just collapses. But Corbyn himself, great guy, but he's not the next Lenin. He doesn't have his own sort of clear vision of what should the party be, what is the project, how is it structured. Has quite a reputation for being indecisive, and also seems basically to be somewhat impressionable, that he's influenced by the people around him, the people he's talking to. So the whole process kind of degenerates into just a battle for influence over Corbyn personally. Different insiders have got their own ideas, and they're just trying to get Corbyn's ear and Corbyn's backing, which is again partly why you have that thing with all the leaks of people just announcing Corbyn's going to do this, Corbyn's going to do that, trying to bounce him into things. But actually, even beyond Corbyn, it seems like hardly any of these people involved at the national level really have clear ideas of their own about, what should the programme for the party be, what should the structure for the party be, what are the politics for it, what's the programme, what does the process for any of this look like? I mean, one of the few people who's put a bit more flesh on the bones on it all is James Schneider. And you may agree or disagree with what he says, but it at least has said something publicly, but actually he's hardly said anything. He wrote a book about some of this about 4 years ago, and then he's been on a couple of Novara podcasts, and then more recently in the last few weeks, he actually did quite an interesting interview in New Left Review. But other than that, hardly any of these people have said anything substantive about what they think the party should be, and it just sort of reinforces this cycle of secrecy and dysfunction because nobody involved has anything substantive that they can lay out publicly. So it can't get any real scrutiny, and nobody can say, well, look, there's a problem with what you're doing. You can't criticize it because you don't know what they're saying. And there's no way for anyone from the outside to contribute to the intellectual development of the project. Again, I expand on some of this in my Prometheus article. I do think there's a sort of cultural hangover from the Labour left, and I think it's to do with the structures of the Labour Party, actually the structure of the electoral system, but I'm not going to go into that now. But anyway, so the whole thing seems to get stuck in a total deadlock. And eventually this proposal is brought forward, I suspect brought forward by Andrew Feinstein, or at least pushed by him. I don't know originally who came up with the idea, but this idea for a co-leadership where Corbyn would just be the sort of ceremonial figurehead, the moral leader of the party, but that someone else would be in the sort of executive leadership role. And again, relatively last minute, Zara Sultana seems to be brought in as the proposed co-leader. Although I've heard apparently she sort of preconditioned it on she's only going to be involved if she's the co-leader and if certain people, I think particularly some of the people involved around Collective at the start, are not in leadership positions. Although I don't have that exactly confirmed. I was told by, again, this is all sort of partial accounts based on different people on different sides of it. So all of this taken with a bit of a pinch of salt. But I was told by one of the people involved on the sort of pro-Sultana side that they thought they'd got agreement about this co-leadership thing way back in May, but that then Corbyn changed his mind, possibly under pressure from people like Carrie Murphy and others who had relied on their personal connection with Corbyn to have influence, and therefore could see that this process would, amongst other things, be a way of excluding them. So then at the start of July, this sort of secret organising committee has a vote about, I think there's two different proposals brought, one about co-leadership, one about Corbyn as single leader. I think the people on the against the co-leadership claim that the way this was done was a bit underhanded and undemocratic, and it was sort of brought at the last minute and proposals weren't. And I mean, based on the way all of this seems to have been run, that doesn't sound particularly hard to believe, but it sounds like that's what all of it's like. But at any rate, apparently that was voted through on a 2/3 majority. Again, if you want the details, I think Andrew Murray did some quite good reporting about this in the Morning Star. And then the same evening, Zara Sultana publicly announces that her and Jeremy are going to co-lead the founding of a new party, which is a slightly interesting form of words. And it seems fairly clear that that announcement was not cleared with Corbyn or pretty much with anyone else, and that it was done as a sort of fait accompli to say, look, the vote has been taken. This is the decision. This is now public. You can't reverse it. This is what's going to happen. And then the next day, Corbyn releases a very strange, mealy-mouthed statement that quite conspicuously does not say the same thing as what Zara Sultana said. And to me, it looked like it was very much a polite rebuke. And it was then followed by a whole series of like extremely damaging leaks in the right-wing press, which made it look like the whole project might be in danger of collapsing. And then we had several weeks of sort of stasis and confusion. Nobody knew what was going on. In that time, quite interestingly, Max Shanley enters the scene, who some of you may be familiar with. Quite an interesting character. When I first encountered him, he was described to me as being John Lansman's protege in the Labour left. He's come a long way since those days. I think he's, from what I understand, probably a regular subscriber to the Weekly Worker these days. Certainly, he's been reading up on revolutionary strategy. In fact, he may well be watching this stream. So, hi. And Max, again, one of the only people in this who has actually written some like detailed, coherent proposals. Again, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, he's actually put forward some ideas of what the party should be, how we should build it. And he sort of took advantage of this moment of stasis when nobody was offering a way forward to be the sort of first person out of the gate with a publicly published idea about what to do. Subtitled it "The Case for a British DSA," referring to the Democratic Socialists of America, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. He's not really talking about the DSA, though. What he's really doing is sort of painting a somewhat idealized picture of the DSA, just as a way of making the idea of a democratic, multi-tendency socialist organisation, making that seem more tangible and realistic and plausible to people on the British left who would, when you talk about a socialist party, they just think about the sects, or they think about Momentum or the Labour Party or all these other failed models. And again, there's details that one may disagree with or criticise with on Max's proposal, but I think a lot of it, and a lot of the thrust of it, is very similar to the sorts of things that people will have been discussing at Communist University all week. They then followed it up a week later with a sort of roadmap of how that could be organised through having a democratic conference and so on. And I think he's now in the process of trying to draft a proposed constitution for the new party. And Max is someone who's very well connected within the Labour left, or has been very connected within the Labour left. Obviously, most of those people since left the Labour left and now trying to start this new party. And so, used those connections, used his public profile to try to push these ideas. And we do know that a lot of the people involved in the national negotiations have been reading his proposals. Allegedly, even Corbyn and Sultana have read his proposals, and we are told look on them somewhat favourably, but that, how it is with politicians, may be completely meaningless. But it's been clear that they have already had an impact, that the fact that that now there's been this joint announcement by Sultana and Corbyn on the same page saying there is going to be a new party, and it's going to be founded at a democratic conference where everything, even the name, is going to be decided by democratically. I think that does show the influence of what Max was pushing there. And obviously, it's we'd be naive to think that therefore that's all solved, and these sort of entrenched bureaucratic and personal interests are just going to roll over and do something democratic. But when you have a situation like that, where the different bureaucratic factions have reached a total impasse and no particular faction is able to get a clear advantage, then having someone laying out some sort of robust democratic processes, it does have the advantage even to the bureaucrats and to the factionalists, that it sets everyone on a sort of level playing field and provides a way to start moving things forward again. And when the leadership of the left, or the sort of ex-Labour left, is intellectually, it's not got a lot there in terms of ideas, then just random people like us, like Max, writing some ideas and pushing them can end up having a strangely outsized impact. Obviously, it now remains completely up in the air when this conference is going to be, how it's going to be run, who is going to facilitate it, what the process will be, whether it will be meaningfully democratic, whether individuals will attend, whether local groups will attend, whether political organisations will attend. Who knows? So there's not actually a lot more we can say or speculate on that front. But I think it is an important opening, an important opportunity, and it's quite excited to see how it develops. And I'll leave it there.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, thank you, Archie. Tina?
Yes, thanks, Archie, for explaining some of the background shenanigans. It's quite funny to hear, how they use the word democracy. It sounds the opposite end of democracy from our understanding, but I'll get to that. The fact, obviously, that 700,000 people have signed up, I think it would be, to start with, absolutely idiotic to stand aside or say, even just wait and see, or this is going to be shite. It will be shite, but there's nothing. It's good. My politics are pure. Our politics are pure, and we have to stand aside and continue our pureness. Then that's the road to death, isn't it? So clearly, we have to engage as communists. It was quite astonishing that despite it not having a program, despite not having a name, 700,000 people sign up. Maybe it's because it doesn't have a program. Maybe it's because it doesn't have a name, that 700,000 people have signed up, and up to 18%, according to a YouGov poll, would consider voting for it. Obviously, as Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany can attest, that can change rather quickly. And she deserved being thrown out of Parliament for the terrible positions she took. But you know, the Bündnis of Sarah Wagenknecht went from 25% in the polls to 3 or 4 point something it got to. So these things can change quickly, especially if it's so wishy-washy and in a fluid political situation. We should also consider there will be a lot of pull from the right within the Corbyn party, but also from outside to not split the vote, not split the Labour vote when it comes to elections. Not just in localities where perhaps a Tory will get in, a Reform guy will get in, but nationally there will be a lot of pressure on the party to not contest various issues or to maybe not contest a particular locality, etc., so that Reform doesn't get in. And because of the first past the post system, you will also have a push for a coalition with the Greens, stand down agreements with the pro-capitalist, pro-NATO Greens, which will in all likelihood dominate proceedings, knowing Jeremy Corbyn, despite the fact that in polls currently, in the polls, they're below the Corbyn party and have only something like 60,000 members. So they should be the junior partner in any kind of stand down agreements, which I don't think we should always oppose. That's I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a formal coalition, but stand down agreements can tactically, of course, is allowed. That's not a question. But there will be a push for something more than that, especially if Zach Polanski wins, and he is another Corbyn of the Green variety. I think he changes his colours any way the wind blows. So that could easily come to pass, some kind of lash up there. So it would be, as I say, idiotic not to engage with this movement, with this party, which really is, I think Jack formulated as the political expression of the Palestine solidarity movement, and that is it. It is almost the same number of people who will go to Palestine demonstrations, and there's going to be a big overlap. And this is, of course, an important section to engage with. So we need an active and an imaginative approach. We definitely can't wait for Corbyn, or more precisely his various advisors, and Archie outlined, that can go from one day to the other. He changes his mind. So we can't wait to see what will we be allowed to do. Will we be allowed to form a faction? Will we be allowed to form a branch, etc.? So it's, I think, up to comrades to actually take initiatives, and they are doing it. I've mentioned before, some people are doing it in Sheffield, but as I understand it now, there's 65 areas where the first meetings are being planned. I think that's from Crispin Flintoff. He's done a survey, 2,000 people replied, and they're saying, according to that, in 65 areas, people are setting up branches and setting up first meetings, which is exactly what we should do. If it's a real party of the working class, this is what will happen. It might be Corbyn and advisors might be trying to keep a lid on things and might be trying to do what they did with Momentum. And, it is our job, and it's not going to be a pleasant one. It is our job to remind comrades what Corbyn did to our movement with Momentum, how it was ruined from. I'm not saying it was a brilliant organization. It really wasn't. But there was some, there was some democracy there. There was some, you put up a stall during those leadership campaigns. People came flocking to you. It was unbelievable. The enthusiasm from normal working class people, and they wanted to get involved. And Momentum was one way to get involved in that. The Landsman coup, supported by Jeremy Corbyn, supported by John MacDonald, supported by Diane Abbott, brushed all that away, crushed democracy, abolished democracy, all party structures, the local structures, with one brush, by referendum. It's also something we should remember. It was a referendum of Momentum members. They clicked to abolish their own democracy. I mean, it was terrible, but because Jeremy Corbyn said we should do that, they did. So, democracy is might be used when people describe things, but we should say what the real democracy is, and that is people taking things into their own hand, set up branches where you live, get together with others, and just do it. And the more people are doing it, the more harder it will be to say, no, we're not doing that though. We actually decided something else. Have you? No, we've decided something else here. So at the same time, and this is important, while we're doing this, we're getting involved and we're hopefully putting together, if we can, we've discussed it previously, a communist faction of some sort, a communist tendency with other comrades in other groups, where we can formulate a platform of how to engage with this party. And I think it will push us together quite naturally, organically. The communists who have very similar ideas on some of those issues. Corbyn will let people down with his answers. He will, tax the rich is the only programmatic demand so far. And we have to say, yes, tax the rich might be one tiny, tiny part of our program, but by itself, it will solve absolutely nothing, as Michael Roberts outlined. In fact, you need the rich, the ongoing existence of the rich to tax them. So it's not much of a, alternative outlook, really, is it? So Corbyn will disappoint the vast majority of people who are looking for real answers. We have them. We have a duty to put them forward, and we have, we should be imaginative in putting those forward. But at the same time, our job remains also to continue building a communist party, a real communist party, because I suspect this formation will not last a very long time. I suspect we'll get to that. So we need to do both. We need to get involved in this process, but also fight for a communist party outside of it. And hopefully this process within the Corbyn party will help the process of building a communist party outside of it. But the need for communist unity can be addressed in the Corbynist party, perhaps in a more productive way, perhaps in a more fruitful way than we have have we done until now in the communist fusion process. So the fusion process continues, building communist unity continues in the Corbyn party, I think, and perhaps has more favorable chances even. There are a number of problems and issues that we have to get, I think, clear in our head, that we have to organize around, and they almost open themselves up organically from what Corbyn is and what policies he puts forward. And they are around the structure, the democracy that you mentioned, but they're also, of course, about program, the ingrained laborism and electoralism of Corbyn and his advisors, the adherence to social pacifism and the economism of his program, and the constitutional loyalty. These are things that are overlapping in parts, but are broad brushstrokes. So, Archie's outlined this. On the one side, you have those who say, we need one member, one vote. Sounds democratic, but, if it means clicking a button at home, then it turns into the opposite really quickly. So the way this is being proposed is, this is, as opposed to the democracy, the lack of democracy in the CLPs and in the Labour Party branches. And anybody who's had the pleasure of being allowed into the Labour Party for at least a while know what that's like. I mean, the democracy in Labour is horrific. It's a stitch up. It's the opposite of democracy. So yes, they want to avoid that. That leads to Corbyn saying things like, "Oh, we don't want these kind of things." I don't want to. He said in the Owen Jones interview, "I don't want endless battles over who is in control of this committee or that committee." Da. So he's taking the experience, and it's to degrees understandable, the experience of the terrible bureaucracy in the Labour Party. Thinks he's flipping it the other way, 180 degrees, and what he's actually doing is making it worse. So this idea of a federal e-democracy where you sit at home and everybody's got to vote and nobody can discuss anything, nobody can debate. Somebody's chosen the options. We're putting the options for you out there. We understand the members. So here are the options as interpreted by yours truly. Click ABC. That's not democracy. It is the opposite of democracy. It's worse. It's absolutely worse than Labour Party democracy. And these are points we'll have to make. Of course, we're also against this federal structure that is being proposed as an alternative, which is slightly better. I think I agree with Archie that it leaves a little bit more freedom, perhaps, that you could get together and find a way in, but it's not what is needed either. So clearly, as communists, we have a duty to fight for real democracy, a real bottom-up democracy, which includes obviously representative democracy, and not this, having maybe 100. I suspect the conference in November, if they have their way, will have 100 dignitaries, the important people in a room, maybe 200, and the rest at home can do the clicking. That is not democracy. In this context of how Corbyn sees it, he said in that Owen Jones interview, the way, instead of these elections and committees, and the way you keep a party together is by campaigning on fundamental issues like peace and justice. In that context, obviously, elections, motions, discussions, that's boring. That's a waste of time. We know this from the, social forum movements. So they're certainly bloody boring in the Labour Party, soul destroying actually. But that is, of course, not this kind of structure, democratic structure that we have in mind. The e-democracy that's being proposed is demoralizing, it's atomizing, it's demobilizing. It stops comrades from getting together. It stops them from building branches, from formulating their ideas. It stops them from, becoming active participants in such a party and the wider working class movement. So this is the opposite of what we need. Thank God it's all still in flux, I think, and Archie is, I think, right to point that out. So there is space for us to get involved in that. We should say, I mentioned we've talked about the witch hunt in the Labour Party, which was started against Corbyn, but was taken over by Corbyn as well, the anti-Semitism witch hunt. We shouldn't forget that either. That's something we have to remind comrades of. Again, will not make us very popular, but the anti-Semitism witch hunt was continued to be conducted by Jenny Formby, appointed by Jeremy Corbyn, who boasts in the leaked report about how they got Chris Williamson, how they got Jackie Walker, how they got Tony Greenstein. It boasts about how they made the witch hunt more efficient, and they kicked out all the anti-Semites. We were much more efficient than Ian McNicol, and we've done it much better. Has there been any reckoning, any self-criticism from Corbyn about this failure and rolling over to the right? I've not seen it. I think he should be held to account still. It's not impossible to imagine that with those kind of, if you don't reject that attitude and you don't, be accountable for it, that an anti-communist witch hunt might not be far off. We hear already, there are talks about, well, we don't want them coming in talking about workers' militia and that kind of stuff. It's obvious. I wonder who they have in mind. We don't want the fucking Weekly Worker. They do read it. We know, because there's a lot of heads rolling as soon as something appears in the Weekly Worker that's been leaked. Heads are rolling. So, an anti-Trotskyist witch hunt, also very possible. SWP, Socialist Party. We know there's a very fragile peace agreement between Corbyn and them, where he speaks at their platforms, and perhaps in return that they don't really want to get involved with it so much, or just stay on the outside a little bit. Funnily enough, of course, as an aside, neither the Socialist Workers' Party nor the Socialist Party actually want this to become a very successful one-member, one-vote party that would become a rival to their organizations, wouldn't it? They are actually arguing for this being a loose electoral federation where they can, continue to stand under their name, use it to recruit more, etc., which is, I think, is the total perfect definition of sectarianism, which is what they charge us with, putting the needs of your own organizations ahead of that of the working class movement. So arguing against a mass organization of the working class, whatever our caveats is, but if you're arguing against that, I think you are putting the needs of your sect first. We do want a one-member, one-vote party, as I said, but an actual one that does allow the right to form factions, platform, and branches. And in such a context, a representative structure with delegates could be implemented in a very democratic way. You have branches sending delegates, you have platforms sending delegates, affiliated organizations sending delegates, accountable and recallable delegates from branches and groups. we're, independent, local independent campaigns by definitions will each do their own thing. That is, I know it allows us a bit more freedom perhaps, but it will also drag the thing into all sorts of different directions. So Camden's doing this, Stockport is doing that. That's not a serious alternative to what's going on in the world. The world is going down the pan, capitalism is going down the pan in such tremendous speed. We need to be as organized as possible on the highest level as possible. So a federal structure, while giving us some space, I think is not what is needed. We need to organize at least on the level of the existing state. Internationally, of course, continental, international, globally is of course must be the aim. So then to the politics, and I slightly disagree with the formulation of Archie, who said the politics are sort of a hangover from the Labour left. I fear it's much worse than this. I think Corbyn has left Labour, but he's not left laborism. So he is a Labourite through and through. And by that, we don't mean he was a member of the Labour Party, which is how John Rees and others seem to define the word Labourism sometimes. If you're in Labour, you're a Labourist. No, it's if you're fighting for constitutional loyalism, if you're fighting for national socialism of some sort, if your outlook is you're not a Nazi, but national socialism, and particularly in that phrase. But you're fighting to take over national government, and that is actually what Sultana is arguing for quite openly. Her vision is we take over. So we take over government. We become the government. That is the aim of the new party. Problem, of course, when you have ideas like old Labour is dead, and now we have to build new Labour, which has to look a lot like old Labour, slightly better, but within the confines of the nation, within the confines of the constitution, and not rocking the boat too much, economism, etc., etc. So you're just building a slightly better Labour Party. How about we call it New Labour, for example? That might go down well. So clearly the Labour Party has changed, and we have seen it changing, and we got all expelled, most of us. But it's so obviously not dead. It's running the country for a start. It remains an arena of the class struggle that we should continue to engage with as well, if we can. We have small forces, but clearly the unions remain affiliated. I can't see any move of any national union disaffiliating and supporting the Corbyn party. Perhaps that will happen. I don't know which union it's going to be. Unite under Sharon Graham. Yeah, the members are in charge, I've been told, it's not, she can't decide anything. The members want it, then it will happen. All right, yeah, it's a touching naivety about how trade unions work and the level of the bureaucratization of the unions. The GMB, hardly, warfare before welfare, etc. Union, we have to be very critical of the unions, the role unions play. And it's, in that context, it is bizarre. I think the Socialist Party's campaign, they also want a new party, but it has to be based on the unions. And they're not saying union activists, the unions. What Sharon Graham, GMB, what unions? What are you talking about? It's absolute rubbish. It's nonsense. It's pie in the sky. It's just having your own little campaign for the trade union and socialist coalition, So Sharon Graham will go to the Durham Miners Gala and be, she was so angry, speaking loudly, shouting, about solidarity, and we need this and that. And that's it. She's not going to leave the Labour Party. She's not going to leave. She's not going to lead a disaffiliation anytime soon, anyway, from the Labour Party. And why would they? I mean, we're still waiting. The Labour Party has played that quite clever, actually. The workers' legislation, that's been going on for some time, hasn't it? It's been dragging on and on and on. As long as that is still in negotiation, I doubt the unions will disaffiliate. They will want to play a role in it. They will want some crumbs from the capitalist government, the Labour government's table. Understandably, it's their job, I mean, the union leadership relies on capitalism. It is part of capitalism. It relies on the existence of capitalism. It sells service to its members, but it relies on there being a working class that has to sell its labor power. So they're important arenas of the class struggle as well. I'm not saying we shouldn't engage, obviously, really important arenas of the class struggle, but it's idiotic to think that that's where the solution lies. It does not. But we, like in the Labour Party, we engage with the unions, obviously, where we can. We fight for the democratization, radical democratization of unions and the Labour Party to win them over, to win the members over. I very much doubt we are going to win many of the bureaucrats over, but that's not what it's about. It's about the members. To the millions of members who are still involved in the unions and also who vote Labour still. There'll be less next time, I'm sure. But, none of these things are dead, and they might be dying occasionally. They can be revived. Remember how many people thought Labour was dead in 2014? Bam, it came to life and Corbyn was elected. Yes, the structures have now changed, but, it's not quite dead, is it? Laborism also entails the nationalist outlook of the British Road to Socialism, Communist Party program, which is Corbyn's program, really. And it has been the program of the official Labour left in the Labour Party for a long time. It's constitutional loyalism. We're not aiming to overthrow it. We're tweaking things on the edges. It's social pacifism in Britain and abroad. And in this context, electoralism is the norm. And electoralism with the aim, we are not against standing in elections. Electoralism is you try to take over the government. That's your aim. You trying to get into government. Zara Sultana says we have to win to stop Farage being prime minister. James Snyder says, I'm not arguing against winning elections or going into government. That is essential. That's normal. In fact, it is normal for labor rights. That's, of course, that's going to be a struggle. We're going to have clever arguments to explain we don't want to win elections. Well, why did you want to live? We want to win seats in Parliament. We want to use Parliament as a platform. We want to use the council as a platform. But do we want to take over the running of capitalism? Do we want to, manage capital on behalf of the working class? There's been so many examples in history, recent history. I mean, it makes me laugh when Novora Media, they are wheeling out the Greek guy, Yanis, to expert on the Corbyn party. Just look at Greece. Look at what happens when a workers' party tries to run capitalism on behalf of the workers. It cannot be done. You will end up betraying the working class, or you will end up being, buggered and sent to wherever. So electoralism, as it, we had a strategy of winning elections in order to of course we want to win elections, but winning government position is a problem, and we'll have an uphill struggle arguing against that. So we should, understand our history. Karl Liebknecht, we're using Parliament as a platform to argue against the plans of the imperialists, to argue against the plans of capitalism. The Irish woman, Daly, what's her first name? Claire, what she's been doing, I mean, with all caveats of her political outlook and stuff, is brilliant in the European Parliament. They're booing her while she speaks. She's got the microphone here. You can't hear the boos, in the transmissions. She just powers through her speech. They all sitting there, and she's done some brilliant speeches in the European Parliament. That is her politics slightly aside. She's got some dodgy politics on some things, but that is the way we use government participation. And there are, as you said, there are a few people affiliated, 8 MPs so far, I think, sort of. There's going to be lots of councillors who think that's the way to go, and there will be a huge pull from these people to pull things to the right. And we have to argue against that. Take the easy peasy slogan of tax the rich. I mean, we already mentioned it. This is capital. They will not allow it. Capital will not allow even that little demand that sounds so easy peasy. Of course, tax should pay their rich. Capital will either put a stop to it really quickly and make sure that your government doesn't even come to power, or capital will flee the country. Your idea of using their money to prop up a welfare state, gone. It falls apart as soon as you think through what tax the rich actually means. It's at best, it's a small part of a much bigger program for the radical democratization of the society and the economy, if it is to make any sense at all. So I think we, just on that electoralism, I think we do want to obviously win elections, but, taking office is something we should only consider once we have a real big majority in the population behind us, where we can implement at least the vast majority of a minimum program that gets us to, the working class taking actual power, if not the whole minimum program. That would be the condition under capitalism, where you would, capitalism almost ripe for the taking over. But in the here and now, no, it will lead to disaster. And at our Manchester school, Mike presented some facts and figures, which was really interesting. The Manchester school, organized by Prometheus, about how being in opposition can actually be more effective than being in government. If you have a strong opposition, an organized opposition that can put forward your politics in an effective way, you can achieve more change than being in government sometimes. So we need to have discussions about our representatives being properly mandated. And that is something Karl Marx was actually very keen on. Not, we're bound by our conscience when we're elected to parliament, which can swing any old way. See, Shokat Adam, etc. Karl Marx was talking about binding mandates for representatives. I don't think he clarified, should that be binding mandates from the constituents or should that be binding mandates from the party? But clearly we would argue for the mandates being from the party.
Turn the mobile off, please, comrades.
Sorry.
I did remind comrades.
Our involvement, and sorry, I know I've been going on a little bit, but it's an important part. So it's an unstable going to be an unstable organization. It's going to be unstable because it contains labor rights. Rather, I don't want to call them reformists because we also call for reformers, but labor rights and revolutionaries. And before long, something will happen. Either we get kicked out or we're winning. In which case. Maybe they get kicked out, or will they allow us winning, etc. So it's an unstable coalition, but we need to have that, which explains why we also have to build a communist party outside. This is not the vehicle that's going to be able to organize the working class on the highest possible level. We know that, we know because of those in charge, and it seems very unlikely that revolutionaries will be able to just take it over. So we need to build a communist party. It's the same fight, I think, building a communist party, different tactics, and building our communist platform, communist ideas within that party. Yes, we should organize a Marxist communist faction, ideally with others like in rs21 and other organizations. But we should also build branches, get involved in that, fight for a program that is based on what we actually need and not what we think capital will allow us. And that's going to be an uphill struggle. We're going to have arguments with people who say, you can't, it's mad calling for this and this and that. And we'll have to have those arguments. And I think we have to be aware, and we touched on that yesterday, there will be a lot of pull on us as well. This opens up opportunities for us, and it will pull on us. I mean, comrades from the Dutch platform have mentioned that even if you go into any leadership positions or get involved into a broader party like that, it will pull you to the right. It will pull you away from the fight for what's actually needed. So we have to be very clear that we don't throw all our eggs in that basket and ignore building what is actually what we need, a communist trend, but also a communist, with the aim of also then building a communist party outside of it. So we have to be clever about it and as organized as possible. Have to have an education program. I think there's going to be so many issues coming up where we really have to get our head around it. What is social pacifism? What is electoralism? What is constitutional loyalty? What should our program be on those issues? Public meetings on things like those issues, where we take, for example, what the program is going to be of the new Corbyn party, take it apart, but you don't want to be stupid about it. We have to be, not just saying no, but we have to say this is actually what is needed. Join us in the fight to fight for what is actually needed. Taking apart economism, lack of democracy, and fighting for Also concepts like working class, socialism, communism. These are going to be big fights. You know, even Shokat Adam was talking in his article, in his interview in Novara Media. Oh, you can't say it's a left party. We're going to put off the landlords. You know? God almighty, you know, these are going to be huge discussions we're going to have. So it's not going to be easy peasy and a tough fight. We have to think about using, you know, and I hope we're going to play an active role and an imaginative, forward-thinking role. The Weekly Worker, for example, could play a really important role becoming the paper of the communists in the Corbyn party. I mean, I like the, you know, Weekly Worker's got a certain ring to it. Perhaps it needs to be changed. The title would have to be changed or something. The editorial board opened up for groups who are interested, individuals who are interested in fighting alongside us for a communism in the Corbyn party. This is going to be, it's going to be unstable. It's not going to last decades, but it will dominate the left for the next years to come. And we have to make as big a splash as we possibly can. Why Marx could organize some of these discussions, etc., and have proper education series. But this is a huge opportunity which comes with a lot of dangers, but we have to really go for it and go full in without being stupid about it and without having any illusions that this is the answer, but it is part of the answer.
Okay, I'd like to thank both comrades for a very informative and interesting opening. I've got one speaker so far, but
yeah, Archie, your talk reminded me of criminology. I mean, it does say everything, doesn't it? That, you know, you're guessing, someone said this, and who knows? I mean, and that does say something. So this is an extremely opaque, extremely undemocratic beginning. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to end like that. I mean, I think parties are formed top down. I mean, we can talk about bottom up, but I mean, you know, in terms of I'm going to launch a party, that's you're already beginning a top down. But it is the secrecy, but it's also the personality cult, because precisely, you know, you win one of these votes, Tina, and it's not going to be, I don't know what his name is, someone or other was elected along, you know, as an independent. It's the big JC himself that's going to decide, because if the whole party, you know, revolves around one personality, that personality doesn't just have enormous power, they have veto power. They have the veto power of saying, well, I walk. If you do that, I walk. Of course, he'll do it if it came to that, in the name of all sensible people in the party, all the people that, you know, aren't you. Something like that. So there are extreme dangers, you know, of it being unstable. That's absolutely correct. And I agree with Tina, and I agree with you. Obviously, that doesn't mean you don't go in the same way. You know, we were already in the Labour Party. But yeah, when Corbyn was elected, I'm not going to insult anybody who didn't join, but anyone who didn't join is a fucking traitor, right? I mean, you had excuses, but I'm going to say SWP, like SWP, spew, and we could carry on, you know. But yeah, they stood aside, and they were telling us, weren't they, in their editorials, Socialist Worker, they were saying things like, oh, don't get involved in committee rooms. That's so boring. Get out on the streets and fight for strikes. All this debate stuff, conferences, we don't want that, do we? And therefore, I found it very interesting to read, I don't know if this is the latest article by John Rees in Counterfire, but the most recent article I read was on the JCP. And one of the comrades on our e-caucus put a comment up on it, and he said, "Same old. It's so reminiscent." And I instantly responded, "No, it's not reminiscent. This is completely different from John Rees in the past." And in my mind, I was remembering back in the day of not only respect, but closer contact with him in the Socialist Alliance. What did the SWP want the Socialist Alliance to be? They wanted it to be old Labour, right? When you were meant to be canvassing, going, knocking on the door, you were meant to present yourself as old Labour. John Rees, in his latest article, says, we don't want old Labour. We don't want all of this old stuff. What we want is, well, he did then say strikes and streets, but he was rejecting laborism where he previously championed it. So the message I got from that, and the message I get from Alex Kalinikos and the editorials of Socialist Worker, leave Spew and the Socialist aside, it sort of chimes with your criminology. These people are on the outside. They are not on the inside, because if they were on the inside, they'd be talking about this is marvelous, as broad as possible. This is the perfect vehicle, etc. So what we've heard again, these are all little bits, aren't they, trying to put some picture together. But yes, Tina's right. We've also heard, again, this is from outsiders, we've got to keep out the